to another episode of the Microshift Project Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Nick Valinchak. That's Nicky V if you're nasty. And I'm coming with a heart of gratitude today because of the outpouring that I've had from people who have listened to the podcast that I've done up to this point. It means a lot to me. You know, I do this for a variety of different reasons. Some of them are self-serving. Some of them are to really hope that my story and the stories of people that I've encountered along the way in my life can help other people either find the change or the satisfaction and joy out of life that I feel like I've been able to discover over the last decade specifically. I kind of look at my life almost in like decade-ish chunks, which it is kind of scary because at 41, I'm like technically just starting a new one, and there's no guarantee that you know the direction that that's going to go. You can just kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best and do all that you can. I look at really like, I would call it probably like the first 8 years, almost 9 of my life were peaceful. Just, you know, a normal family upbringing. And then at the point where my mom died, probably to the point where I ended up at the mission, so we're talking about roughly 12 years, it was an extremely tumultuous period where for a lot of it, I just felt like ridiculously out of control for a variety of reasons, right? Some of them later on in those years had to do with my drug usage and the decisions I was making. But I think even, you know, probably like 9 to 14, there was just a lot of like not knowing where I should fit in and how I felt in my own skin. And I think for a lot of people, that is a very common type of feeling, right? Where you're trying to figure some things out. For me, it was not just dealing with the loss of my mother, but it was going from what at that point ended up being like a 12-person Catholic school, going to a 220 to 250 kid middle school at Campfield Middle School, not really knowing anybody there, not having had to ever really make friends because, you know, I'd been around the people who went to my Catholic school oftentimes even before I started attending that school because I also went to church there at the time. So that was just a very tough period in my life trying to figure out how all of this came together. And then when I did kind of finally figure it out, it was almost compounding on the back of the drug usage. So it just made for like those teenage and you know, late adolescent, I guess is what you would call it, in early adult years to just be really, really difficult. And then I think, you know, and again, it's only been 5 real episodes where I've talked mostly just about the things that helped shape me. So we really don't have a tremendous insight into the overall story and exactly who, what, when, where, how, and why everything happened at really any point other than very small conversations. But most of my 20s was spent in a period where I was in a relationship with someone who I met at the homeless shelter and ended up getting married to, which again, this is the second or third time I've said this on this podcast. Don't do that. Bad idea. Rehabs, NAAA, no. You need to get yourself together before you can really find that person to attach on. And listen, I know people are going to come back and be like, oh, I met my spouse in AA or NA, and it is the exception, not the rule, okay? You have to understand that most people who meet in those types of situations are probably toxic to each other. And the reality was we were toxic with each other because I was very much serious to the point where I was like, I'm never going back, because I had some renewed confidence that like, I am smart, I can do this, you know, but the person I was with didn't have that. But I was also very much a codependent. And so we really had the opposite personalities that the other person needed. My ex-wife didn't need someone who was just going to lay down and let them do whatever they wanted. And, I needed someone who was going to be present in there and not actively smoking crack and shooting heroin. So, needless to say, that didn't work. It taught me a lot, right? I had to change a lot about myself because I was not happy being that codependent person. There were a lot of very long nights, a lot of stressful moments that went into that. And so, like, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that person. But that was really, like a lot of what my 20s were like. And that's really what I want to talk about a lot today. My 30s, we will obviously touch on because it doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about 4 decades and then just stop at 3, even though we're mostly going to talk about that third decade of my life. My 30s have been so much different where I've really moved into that leadership mindset where I've found fulfillment in a lot of things and figured out the things I really want to do and that would make me happiest in life that I have still yet to do, which is things like this podcast, moving into speaking engagements and things of that nature. So I think, this has been, my 30s were probably the best decade of my life just because I really was able to grow and start to become the person that I am now. And while I do say I made changes, I have been very sensitive to the concept of when I make these decisions and I have to make these changes to not go the route of becoming an absolute monster, right? Because I can tell you, and maybe someday we'll go in a lot more detail as to what it was like some of those days and nights living with a female who you're married to and is an active user. But that's not necessarily the structure of the conversation that I wanted to go through today. So really, looking back on my story in the podcast that we've done so far, I talk about 5 pretty specific, not 3, 5 pretty specific like micro shifts that went on in my life. Okay. And again, when you listen to the first 3, the hope from strangers, dignity from the police officer, and the mere moment I had with Frank, those are very much like all within. It could have been as little as a month's time. I mean, I have a really good memory for someone who's done all of this stuff that I've done. It is mostly about like the good stuff in addiction, which is, sometimes I feel like we just have to be honest and call it what it is, that sometimes you have fun and you make memories in that. And I do think to an extent that is what makes it a little harder to get away, is you do still have good moments in some of those times. They are greatly dwarfed by the destruction that you're causing behind you. But this is about honesty and transparency. So you have to state that, like, yes, I had a lot of fun times using drugs. But like, I don't really remember the full context of all of like, oh, well, I can tell you like, hey, this was the party we had at Anthony's house and that this is what happened. I can't tell you what date it was, but like, I know things like that. Or remember when we had the fight with so-and-so at this time, and like, I know that stuff. But when it comes to things like the time I was homeless and living in a car and stuff like that, a lot of these details tend to run together because you're just a force of destruction. So, I mean, we could have been talking about anywhere from as little as 2 weeks to at most a month where I encountered my first 3 like real micro shifts that kind of started moving me down the line as to what, what my post-addiction life was going to look like. And I think when I go back and think about like, what was it like those early days at the rescue mission when you woke up in the morning and you had to come to this realization that life was different now. You know, it's not the same beast as it was before. You're in a safe place, but the context and all of your surroundings have changed in some like pretty impactful ways. And it can be challenging from your perspective and even the perspective of your family, because I don't think they quite grasp and understand what it looks like either when you're going through those things. And a lot of times it can seem like you're in a place where you say you're doing better, but there's not that real evidence that the changes are taking place. And I think missions and rehabs can kind of be that same, it can be kind of the same type of place. I think the first biggest thing was really coming to the understanding and realization that like my social structure as I knew it was done. On a whole, I think people can be. I will not say people will be, but I think people can be forgiving. Ultimately, it comes down to a person-by-person basis, and it also depends how much you've done to them. Everyone is going to have a different tolerance as to what they're willing to forgive. And then there's different levels of forgiveness. And I think a lot of times people like me who do value those relationships that we had and put together, we oftentimes think forgiveness means that things can go back to the way they were in our relationships. And especially in the short term, that is almost certainly not true. I can tell you for at least the first few months I was at the mission, none of my friends had any amount of concern about me, period. Now, unfair of me to say to an extent, I just mean from the perspective like no one called, no one showed up to see how I was doing, and I had done so much to so many different people in so many different ways that there, of course, was a stigma on me, right? People looked at me and it was fuck Nick because XYZ. Some of it might be personal, some of it might be guilty by association, but at the end of the day, that's what it really came down to. I think during my whole time at the rescue mission, 2 people reached out to me on the same call, and I think they tried to do it a couple of different times where they were, you know, inevitably still getting high with each other, and they called me, and I talked to them, and they were like, dude, we fucking love you, man, and we miss you. And it was both the best thing at the time for me to hear that even somebody, and they were 2 of my best friends at some point, somebody still cared, and my, you know, the time we spent together meant something, but it was also kind of like, we can't be friends at the same time too, because I'm actively trying to get myself better. You haven't hit a bottom or had that point where you had to come to realize like, hey, the way I did things before, I can't do them the same way anymore. And because of that, you know, I have to detach from you. And it's frustrating for sure. But for those who are in that lifestyle trying to get out of it, you have to understand that you have to break away from that chaos and that it's no longer good or healthy for you to be in the surroundings you are. And once you come to that understanding, you start to look around you. And at least for me, it felt like the world got a lot smaller, right? Because everybody that I had put myself around effectively was doing these things that I shouldn't or couldn't do anymore. And that's rough. Like, it is super freaking rough to go through that that lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? It's really tough to kind of make those connections and understand that you're out of your old circle, right? No longer are you able to tap back in to those people, and you have to kind of make a new series of friends and establish a new basis of who your support structure is going to be. And that's really hard. And I can absolutely say that not immediately, but 3-4 years, maybe 2-3 years after I left the mission, I would reach out and talk to some of my old friends, and we would communicate and say, like, yeah, we're going to do XYZ and whatever. And then it would just always fail to come through, because I think they looked at me and they were like, well, we're going to do this. And it's a combination of like, he already had to come through so much. I don't want to be the person who throws him back into the abyss, but also I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. And so if I don't want him to be around that, like, it's just best that we don't talk to them anymore. And it really probably was 27, 28, maybe even as far off as 30 before I was able to really start to be around some of those people again, because they started getting out of the day-to-day activity of doing that. And so it finally felt a little more safe for everybody involved. And yeah, so that was a big step for me to have to go through. And you're changing identities because everybody has known you as this thing, and now you're becoming this thing. And even in the new communities you're trying to move into, there's still a stigma because you want to be honest. You know that in recovery, honesty is a huge part of the whole process. And I can remember going to church functions and having communications with people and telling them my story, and then superficially and to your face saying things like, oh man, that's awesome, you know, God bless. But then hearing in passing or behind the scenes like, well, we're a little bit wary because Nick used to be a drug addict and we're not sure how that's going to pan out. And I find a lot of behavior like that curious but expected. I think it's reasonable for people to be skeptical of you because of your background and you haven't shown anything to them. I would even go as far to say, like, I'm not looking at the church aspect too much of it and thumbing my nose at the church aspect of it, because even people in church, I mean, everybody has stuff. Everybody deals with things. I think the biggest picture is like, if you have never experienced someone with addiction and that's your attitude, then I do think that's a little bit says more about you than it does about me. And so it was even tough then to really understand how I fit in. And then admittedly, sometimes if I wanted to, like, it was never a call to go back to drugs, but is this the tribe that I want to call my own? And I will admit that I never felt like I fit in there either, which just made the whole process of, you know, coming out on the right side even harder, because I didn't feel like I truly had people who were willing to talk to me on a person-by-person basis as much as just theologically and ideologically painting broad strokes. And that's not what this type of behavior is. This is not what a type of person who's going through addiction needs. It's very much a very specific type of thing. So it made it very hard. The other thing that made it very hard, and I have become very good at this, maybe too good or obsessive over this, it's really establishing new structures when you had none. Even the concept of getting up in the morning at 5:30. When you're And first and foremost, I'm not getting up at 5:30 right now. I don't care what the situation would be unless it was absolutely something necessary for my kid. My ass ain't getting out of bed at 5:30 in the morning. Okay, if you got to find someone else to help you with that. That's just not me. But when you're in a facility where those are the rules, you have to adapt that structure, and then you start to begin to understand that your very existence on this earth, because of the habits and maybe the physiological makeup you have, are dependent on having this structure, because addiction runs on chaos. And structure and chaos are fundamentally two different things. So understanding that you need that structure and you need to build structure, and sometimes it's on a day-to-day basis, is difficult. But you have to start small too. And so it can be, as much as I don't aspire or follow this anymore, it could be as easy as wake up, eat, work, sleep, right? I've done 4 things in a format all day, and they're smaller chunks. Obviously, it's probably wake up, eat, work, eat, relax, sleep. But for the sake of this argument, that's how it's set up. And realistically, too, it kind of goes along with the full concept of microshifts, where it's not one big thing. It's a bunch of little things that you do that make up the pie in total. And so it's extremely difficult for someone who has never, or it's been a long time since they've lived in some kind of construct where they were able to have structure, to just bounce back into it. And I know for me, that was the hardest thing, because I have been doing what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it for the longest time. Now you're telling me that I can't do that anymore. And it really was, for me, an actual roller coaster, because at first you're just like, I'm going to do whatever they ask me to do. And you know what? I'm going to eat fish on Friday. Even though I don't like it, I'm going to get up and I'm going to work in the kitchen, and I'm going to sweep outside, and I'm going to clean the floors, and I'm going to do all the things that they asked me to do, and I'm going to do it the best I can with a smile on my face. And then a couple months goes by, and you're like, I'm really sick of waking up. I understand now. I really hate fish, and I don't want to eat it anymore. I don't want to sweep after all these nasty people, that they're adults. They should be able to do it themselves. I shouldn't have to do it for them. And when you get pushed into that extreme, you come down on the other side. And so for me, it really was an absolute roller coaster, to the point where I went up and down the hill one time, and then I recognized, like, okay, I was trying to move too far too fast, and had to tell the people at the mission, like, I don't expect unique treatment. Okay, I understand. I'm like every other person who's here. I put myself here for one reason or another, right? There are a few people, mostly younger, mostly children, that didn't have any choice in ending up there, but I did. And so, I just started adding little things, one step at a time type deals. And I think this stage is really confusing for the people around you, right? Because I think when you say you're coming off drugs and you're doing better, I think people think it's something bigger than it is. And it's really crazy to say, because you are doing something that a lot of people aren't able to do, or it takes them forever to get to the point where they finally make the decision to do it. But I think that the outsiders always look at it, the people who haven't been through it always look at it and assume that they're going to be able to look at you immediately and see an abundance of change. But the reality is, just like I just described and how I had to deal with structure in my life, I was still very much struggling. It's not just an instantaneous, like, yeah, I got this. And you're even in a position like I was, where I'm living in a place where my residency there depends on my adherence of what they're doing, and I still still want to fight back and be like, I can't do this because it's foreign to me, right? And so I think you just have to be willing to be there, to be present, to understand that this person is going through what is ultimately probably going to be the toughest situation of their life. And all they need you to do is understand that. We're not asking you for money. A lot of times we're not even asking you for support. We're just asking for empathy and understanding about what's going on in the unique position that we are in our lives. The reality of the matter is this: recovery is a slow process. It's perseverance in slow motion. And because of that, it takes time. And time is something not everybody wants to hear, but the reality is this: it has to happen. It has to happen for us to be able to get better, to do the right things, and to go on to be the people that we always wanted to be. I think we're going to call it a day there. I'm very appreciative for everybody who is listening. If this has touched you and you know someone who could benefit from hearing something like this, please pass it along to them. As always, I will be thoroughly in your debt if you subscribe, continue to listen, like and share. Follow us on social media, mostly at the Microshift or at Nick from CWE. We will see you again next time.